Hi, everybody, and greetings from Madison, Wisconsin, AA, to my Canadian AA family at the United Group in Welland, Ontario, in Canada. Congratulations, Liz, for 40 years of sobriety in AA, and congratulations to anybody else celebrating their AA sobriety. I'm happy to be included in this celebration of our recovery from alcoholism and other addictions. My name is Dave, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm a member of the Westsiders group in Madison, Wisconsin, where I identify myself as Mac. My family has been connected with the United Group since it was founded, sometimes in the 1956 to 1957 period, if my memory serves me. My dad, Roy Macmaster, joined AA in Welland in 1949 and was sober until 1970 when he died from lung cancer caused by his heavy cigarette smoking. Well, my name is David Roy Macmaster. I am okay using my name and my dad's name in case somebody is doing AA history for the archives. My sobriety date is October the 8th, 1956. My first AA meeting was a Monday night meeting in Port Colborne on October the 8th, and that was our Canadian Thanksgiving Day that year. Well, once upon a time, I was an active member of the United Group in Welland when we met at the United Church on King Street across the canal from St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church, where the United Group meets now. My dad was one of the founders of the United Group, along with Hilda Fitzp. I've been invited by my friend Liz to give a message or a talk for her 40th AA anniversary, and am honored to do so. We had hoped I could come to join you for the celebration of sobriety in person, but the pandemic shut that down. So this is the best I can do under the circumstances. Liz and I became good friends in recent years, after we met in person for the first time a few years ago when I was visiting family and friends in Welland, attending AA meetings in the Niagara area. Liz knew Danny C. and others from the early United Group. She probably knew my dad or knew about him and his United Group history. She may also have heard of me, but we had never met. I discovered Liz to be an amazing and an interesting person in recovery who has many talents. Liz has a colorful history made more fascinating because of her passion, her travels, and her life in recovery from alcoholism. And Liz has a lively sense of humor and a sense of drama and destiny. Last year, Liz sent me one of her books of her poetry as a gift. I love it and the powerful, sensitive words expressed in her poems. Liz remembers my birthday, holidays, and sends me photos and videos of her music and scenes from the Welland Canal, one of my favorite places on earth. Liz copes with difficult health problems, yet she finds time to care for people in recovery from alcohol and other drugs when they have life problems and need support and hope. I like people like Liz. Liz reminds me of my first AA sponsors, Boots and Olga. They saved my young life. I am convinced I would not have lived to be 25, never mind 85, which is where I'm at now, without them and people like Liz. So Liz, enjoy your anniversary to the max. Onward now, onto our 12-step tradition of how we are invited to share our stories. You know, what it was like, what happened, and what it is like now. To begin with, I want to say it is my honor to be part of Liz's anniversary and being her life as a friend. If there are others celebrating today, congratulations to you too. Here's an overview of what it was like, what happened, and what it is like now. I was 14 when my mother finally had enough and gave our father a choice. Get some help for your drinking or I will take our 4 kids and leave you. Dad made the call, came to AA and never drank alcohol again. Our family life improved with AA and Al-Anon, that became a big part of our parents' lives. Now I started smoking at 14, started drinking at 16, even though I had promised my mother I would never drink. I joined the Canadian Navy at 18. My drinking increased after basic training when I got drunk whenever I could. I have never had any success with social drinking and don't even know what it is. I know what it is, but I never did any of it. I believe I was born with the alcoholic gene. My drinking could be psychotic and frequently was. This led to dangerous situations when I had no idea of who I was, where I was, because of blackouts and passing out and becoming unconscious frequently with my drinking. I did a number of bizarre things that got me locked up. I was absent without leave for a week after returning from a voyage to Australia in 1954. I was a deserter for more than a month in 1955. That offense put me in military prison and led to my discharge on psychiatric medical grounds. They thought I was crazy. The truth was I was a young alcoholic. The alcohol-inspired desertion happened when the Korean War was on, when desertion was a serious offense. It always has been, and it was particularly so in wartime. While I was on that month-long binge, I was being sought by the Mounties, the RCMP. They visited my parents' home searching for me. And as it happened, I was hiding up the street from our home and happened to spot them before they went in. Now, if they'd have showed up a half an hour later, they would have found me then, and I would have been arrested and put into custody. But I was not done with this episode and kept on drinking and carousing and acting out until I finally turned myself in and was sent for my incarceration. Well, I attempted to sober up when I got out of the Navy and came back to Welland, but I was unsuccessful. And I won't go into much detail about that, but finally, I totaled my car, smashed it up. I had a felony conviction in Niagara Falls, New York. And while I was in Halifax, I had three drunk drinking and whatever they call that, drinking charge, whatever it was. I was locked up in jail 3 times there. They were in Navy cells, which we had our own little prison on the base. Well, so what happened then, that I was in all this jails, and I was in a psych ward in a straitjacket on another occasion. So I was in a lot of trouble. I was out of control, obviously, and that it was all connected to my drinking, all of it. So actually, summing up then, I had been in jail in Canada, United States, and Australia before I was legally old enough to drink at all. And that's just, I'm sure I'm not the only one with this kind of a history. Well, what happened to bring me into recovery, the intervention that happened there, well, as I finally ended up in another suicidal depression. I was in withdrawal from a binge drinking, and I finally reached out for help. Now, my mother advocated for me with my father, whom I was not on good terms with at the time. And as a result of that, Dad sent Boots, one of his sponsees, over to our house where I was now hiding out, having escaped from where I was living before. And so the result of that was that he had to go to work on the afternoon shift, but his partner, Olga, would come and take me to an AA meeting, and I promised to do that. And this guy showed up, and I got in the car, and I realized the car was the car that I had smashed up on a drunk driving episode where I smashed his car up early in one morning, and it was hit and run, and it went away, and I never was caught. Well, I didn't tell him anything about that at my first exposure to AA, but I eventually did tell him and made amends for that. So actually, I stopped drinking after my very first AA meeting, and haven't had a drink since. That's 64 years since that fateful day. If I had nothing else to say about my history of coming into AA, it would mean that AA works, and it can work for a long time, because I started at 21, and now I'm 85 and still doing it. So I got another thing about the United Group, I got my first AA one-year medallion on the next year, October the 8th, 1957, at the United Group. So I was presented with my first AA medallion at the United Group. Now, 6 years later, I was recovering from a car train wreck that I was in, and I was sober at the time. And I came home to live with my parents. I was homeless, I had no place to go, no welfare benefits, or I had no savings to pay for anything. I was on crutches and was very sick with pneumonia and pleurisy after the accident. Well, actually, that's what it was like before I found AA, and I did come to that first meeting. And So having come to AA and for 64 years not drinking, have I improved any? Well, I've been able to help raise 5 of my 6 children in 2 different families, for one thing, sober. And I was blessed to have come into my oldest daughter, Kathy's life, after 30 years not being in it. I left her mother and her before she was a year old, and that's a long story I'm not going to talk about now. So I adopted 3 of my second wife's, Jean's children. She was a widow in 1967, had these 3 kids, so I married her, and I adopted her children. I was very grateful to have that happen in my life. And then we had a little boy, Jason, in 1968. So later on in my life, far into my life in AA and recovery, was that I remarried, and my wife Penny had a little boy, and I helped raise him while we were in that family. Now, I had a grade 10 education. That's all the education I had. And I had many low-paying jobs over the years, sober, but not growing up very much and not being very successful at anything much, but I had a lot of jobs. Well, eventually I got into the addiction field, and even without the education, I started getting more education. I won't go into any detail about that, but I ended up as a director of a major addiction program in La Crosse, Wisconsin, because I was living in the United States by then. And so I had 70 employees and $1.5 million budget to manage. So how with a grade 10 education I ended up with that is too long a story to tell here, but that's what happened. So I was able to become reasonably successful eventually, and I've done pretty well since then. So that's really an important part of my story. But before I got in the addiction field in 1974, I was worked in media and advertising promotion. I once was the advertising and sales promotion manager for a major company in Ontario before I moved to the United States. And I had a lot of experience with printing companies and radio and TV, and not TV, but newspapers. So I had quite a background in marketing and advertising and public relations. So I acquired all that while sober. So through the years of my professional and personal life, actually, I have continued to attend AA regularly, including now. And I was involved in 12-step programs and aware that a higher power was central to my destiny. That's part of my 12-step recovery program. And so that's an important part of what's happened to me. Now, I was a member of the United Group during that period of my convalescence from my car train wreck injuries. And when I was well enough to attend meetings, I started attending regularly the United Group, and I went with my dad to those meetings. Now, driving to those meetings with my dad and Hilda was an experience. Those two actually didn't like each other very much, but they started that group together, and it's continued ever since, all these years. And when I would come back into Ontario, over 50, 60 years, I would drop in and attend AA meetings in Welland and Thorold and all the other communities there. So it was part of the story that I have, is that I came in pretty hopeless and helpless and eventually became a functioning adult human being and taking care of my responsibilities, because I learned that in AA. I was responsible for my recovery. I wasn't responsible for being an alcoholic and a tobacco addict, nicotine addict, but I was responsible for doing something about it, and I found the answers in AA and in my other 12-step programs. Now, the United Group with people like Liz and your other active members has always been amazing people who have been involved in this meeting, in this group. There was Keith H., Boots and Olga, Danny C., Sally, and others whose names I don't remember that well. There was old Charlie that went around a lot with my dad. There was Johnny L., Keith or Lloyd K., Patty McP., and Tubby T. There are others, lots of different interesting people that I met in the United Group over the years. I think Al-Anon and AA met at the same time on Thursday evenings at 8 o'clock, I think. A lot of recovery happened at the United Group, and it's happening still. I'm grateful to know. I'm also grateful for the time and work I did with Keith in the development of the arid group homes. And there was Keith and Kitch and Barb and others involved with that. And I have been going to AA meetings there every time I return from the States back home to Welland. So that usually was in the summer, and occasionally I came at different times of the year. So I've been connected with the United Group directly and indirectly all these years. Although I don't consider myself a regular member now, but I go there when I am back in the area. That's where I met Liz. And I've spoken occasionally at the United Group. One time my sister Janet came, my youngest sister Janet came, and that was special to have her there. And she was a little girl. When she was a little girl, that Thanksgiving Day in 1956, when I went to my first AA meeting, she was this little girl, and she was very confused as to why I was sick, and what was wrong with me, and why was I sick. But it was great to have that. So one year, I think it was, I just want to talk just a moment or two about the St. Andrew's Church, because I have a connection with that church like I have with the United Group. My mother made sure all 4 of her children went to Sunday school and had a kind of a Christian education. And I've been memories of being part of that church and Sunday school when I was a young boy, and beginning as a young teenager, but I quit the church so shortly after I joined the Navy. So ironically, my father, was a Scottish immigrant atheist. He was a serious atheist, but he never interfered with our mother's raising the kids in church. He didn't have any religion until he found a higher power in AA and had one for the rest of his life. So that was an important part of it. It's a bit more about the history of the United Group. When my dad helped start it. Originally, Dad was in the Welland group that met at the Notre Dame High School. And when the group decided that the group conscience that they needed to move out of there, they went to a Lutheran church in Welland. My dad was disturbed about that decision, the group conscience, to move that, so he stopped going there and formed the Ambassador group. Well, the Ambassador group was basically a bunch of his dad's people he met in the program. Mostly were unemployed and disabled, and none of them could chip in for the gas, but they drove all over the Niagara area, Buffalo, New York, Hamilton area, going to different meetings in my dad's car. And that was a great growing experience for my dad, but he eventually got tired of that, and that's when he and Hilda decided to create the United Group. And so I was disappointed a bit, because that also in the Sunday mornings in those days, we met also at the cafeteria at the Notre Dame High School, but then some guy named Harry McGee, the Growler, and his cronies decided they should not go there anymore and go to the sanitarium and over the hill looking over St. Catherine's. But I was disturbed about that. The people who were active in that group were Harry and Molly L., who were my dad's sponsors. He had those 2 sponsors, just as I had mine, Boots and Olga, a couple. Anyway, that's gone on all these times. And the United Group marches on. I continue to march on too as a member of AA and going to meetings regularly. As I conclude my remarks, there may be some who have heard my story over the years who may be disappointed that I am not talking this time about how I ended up naked in the Sutherland Thorpe Funeral Home in Welland. I'll have to tell that another time. I've told it many times, and it was a pretty good indication, as my dad told me. He said, I can't say for sure if you're an alcoholic, but you're sure showing strong alcoholic tendencies, he said. Well, the tendencies were I was a full-blown alcoholic when I was just a young guy, and I'm now a sober alcoholic in AA today. So I want to say thank you for the privilege of being asked to share a long distance like this, tell a bit of my story. It's been an honor to do that. It's been a pleasure too, although doing this recording part of it has been a bit of a challenge. That I did is I wrote out basically what I was hoping to say, and I thought, well, I could maybe read it, and that'll work. And I guess it has, because that's what I have. Now I've got to find a way to get this up on YouTube so Liz can play it at the meeting. But I will want to conclude by saying I developed a recovery equation. It goes G more than C equals PM. And that's gratitude more than complaints equals peace of mind. So I've been using that motto. So that doesn't mean I don't have complaints. I have my share. But when I feed my gratitude more than I'm feeding my complaints, I feel better. And it's easier to stay sober that way. So thank you for this opportunity. And I hope everybody has a really good holiday period time. And Liz, thank you very much for being part of my life now. And with 40 years of sobriety in AA, you are an example for many people. Your story is a very powerful and compelling one. And so goodwill from Madison, Wisconsin to Welland and the United Group. Thank you and goodbye.